Hi everybody, Chris here from Truly Holistic. Now I wanted to do a video about, and we've talked about this in previous videos, but I want to kind of link it and relate it to something that there's a lot of information about root canals. Okay, and I saw an article which has been around for a wee while, but regarding Dr. McCullough, and yeah, there's a number of more holistic healers and holistic practitioners that talk about, maybe double thinking about getting a root canal or not. And this article was mainly based about root canals. Dr. McCullough was saying that a majority, like 97% of people that end up getting cancer have had a root canal done. And I also saw an article where it was more from a mainstream medicine article that was kind of saying, that was a hoax, it was a bit of a myth, that what Dr. McCullough is saying in regards to those statistics. Now, what I wanted to talk about, the relevance of cancer and also a root canal, whether you believe, Dr. McCullough or more of a mainstream model, that's up to you. We all have our own opinion on that. But what I want to talk about that, and what I'm finding here at Truly Holistic, is this whole process of fermentation. And we've talked about this in previous videos, but I wanted to talk it in the relevance of the root canal scenario. Now, for anybody that doesn't know about what a root canal is, we'll talk about the definition of one. Now, the root canal is when an infected tooth is drilled into, and the center of the tooth's root is cleaned and then filled up. Okay. Now, what they mean by cleaned is that everything within the center of the tooth is removed. Okay. Now, sadly, everything that's within the center of the tooth is there to keep that tooth alive. For example, it's the center of the tooth is filled with blood vessels, connective tissue, and nerve endings that keep that tooth alive. Okay. Now, the mainstream model will say, well, we need to do something about that tooth if there's a chronic infection within it, and I understand that. I absolutely agree. But is the answer really to remove everything that's living about that tooth, but at the same time keep that tooth, even though it's not living anymore, in the mouth? I do not agree with that. And that's where a lot of the people like Dr. McCullough and a lot of holistic practitioners are jumping up and down about, hey, do not get a root canal. Now, the other option obviously available if that tooth is broken down or fractured because it's heavily infected or it's damaged in some way, is obviously tooth extraction. Now, let's look at those two scenarios. What happens is, okay, if you got a tooth that's inside is crumbling away, whether that's through an infection, cavity, plaque, infection, you name it. And quite often this will happen with a tooth that's already got a filling in it, because again, the filling doesn't strengthen the tooth, it just keeps the tooth together. Over time it will just crumble away anyway. Now, if we extract that tooth out, okay, we remove the tooth out, okay, we're removing a tooth that is obviously dying. Okay, now let's take the scenario of somebody that's got appendicitis, okay, and it's ruptured. Okay, heavily infected again. This is another scenario for another part of tissue in the body, because the tooth is tissue, right? It's bone. Now, it gets infected, okay, it perforates, and all of a sudden the infection gets spread elsewhere, and people can die in regards to that. That is a really emergency case. Now, what they end up doing, they don't leave that appendix in there, do they? They remove it because they know it's dead tissue, right? And it's heavily infected, it shouldn't be in there, so they remove it, right? And even if it hasn't perforated, they think, well, it's infected, we need to get rid of it. So why is there the emphasis of getting rid of that, but when in regards to a tooth, we keep it there? Obviously, the biggest thing that comes to mind is how we look, right? When we smile, we can see our teeth, right? Appendix, we don't see it. So what that leads to the fact is that there are procedures in place, like a root canal, that is all more based around how you're going to look, okay, not the right correct procedure for your health. Okay, now how this relates to fermentation is the fact that what I find is that the fermentation process, okay, we ferment our foods, right, to create a food source for bacteria in our body. Okay, if it's the correct strain, then that's going to allow not only more friendly bacteria to then populate your gut, but it's going to give the food source for them to feed on to increase their numbers. And that's fine. But let's look at it in the other way. What about if there's a food source for the pathogenic bacteria, the mold, the fungus, the yeast in the body? Because as anybody that's seen my videos before, my theory of origin of infection is quite different to a lot of the mainstream ideas of infection. You know, we have more microbe DNA, microbe cells in our body, on our body, than our own cells. Okay, so this is important because if we neglect that fact, then we're going to suffer for it. We are a farmer of microbes. Now, every strain, whether that's yeast, mold, fungus, bacteria, and so on, is part of us. It's within us already. And we need to keep certain strains in check by friendly bacteria, okay, and beneficial yeasts and those sorts of things that keep things in check. It's the yin and yang again. There's bad bacteria, it's good bacteria. Good yeast, bad yeast. Depends on the strains. So if we keep everything in check, you go on with life with good vitality, good health. Now, if we don't keep those pathogenic bacteria, the mold, the fungus, yeast in check, then we get into trouble, and it creates an environment within the body that becomes more acidic, okay, and therefore that just increases their numbers, okay, and then lo and behold, years down the line you get cancer. Okay, so how that relates to a root canal is the fact that, one, now because all the living component of that tooth, you've got the outer shell still there, but the inner component's been removed. There's no blood supply that can get to that tooth. So that means any microbes that want to evade your immune system can go there and know it's a safe haven. They can never be reached by your immune system. Now that is a big problem. One, that alone. Now the other thing is, the other problem is that the what food source are these pathogenic bacteria, yeast, mold, fungus, yeast, what parasites, what are they feeding on? Dead tissue. And what is a root canal? Dead tissue. And that's the problem. That's the biggest problem. Okay, so all of a sudden you've got a piece of tissue in your body, which is a tooth where the insides have been removed, which we call a root canal. Is one, it evades your immune system. Your immune system can't do anything about it. Two, it's a form of food for the microbes you do not want to reproduce and replicate their numbers. And that formula, do you know what that formula creates? Cancer in the body. So it was interesting to see that article in regards to Dr. McCullough saying 97% of people that end up getting cancer had a root canal in their life. And that set off alarm bells straight away, and the relevance of what I'm seeing here at Truly Holistic when we're working with people. They've got really chronic problems. It comes down to a fermentation problem. And then we clear that out and we realize, oh, there's accumulation of yeast, there's accumulation of fungus or mold or a bacteria of some strain. Now, a lot of people say, well, do I just increase my friendly bacteria colony? So therefore taking probiotic supplements, prebiotics, whether that's certain fibers or a supplement of some sort. And quite a lot of these people are already taking those stuff, but it's not helping them, because if it would help them if that food source, the dead tissue, was not within the body. But while that dead tissue is still within the body, there's no chance you're going to keep that in check. That dead tissue needs to go. So for example, in regards to dentistry, if there's a root canal, that's dead tissue, it has to go. Or your body is always going to be fighting a losing battle in regards to keeping these bad bacteria, mold, fungus, yeast in check. Okay, and that's the problem of it. Okay, so what I'm finding with people is, they may have some dead tissue in their gut. Okay, and if that dead tissue, what happens with the dead tissue? It putrefies, right? Straight away, that's a magnet for parasites, mold, yeast, fungus, and all these conditions. Okay, and then what happens there is they replicate their numbers, which is really the core of your microbe kingdom is your gut, and then that creates a cascade of inflammation. Now, if you have inflammation in your gut, then you have systemic inflammation all over your body, and lo and behold, we get conditions called all these syndromes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, where what's one of the symptoms? Systemic inflammation, aching and pains all over the body. Okay, it's a gut problem, and it's a microbe problem. It's a fermentation problem. Now, another thing about fermentation is, if that's happening in the gut, you'll feel bloated. Okay, now that bloat is an excess of carbon dioxide, and what you'll notice is our soda industry, you'll notice on the label carbonated water, right, or carbonation. Now, they got that idea originally because all those drinks used to be fermented drinks originally. And again, fermentation of bacteria, the byproduct of that is a release of carbon dioxide, which creates carbonate bubbles. Okay, so that creates that bloating feeling. And that's usually a good indicator that you've got a carbonation problem, which comes from a fermentation, an adverse fermentation process, which is not benefiting you whatsoever. So what I'm finding here actually, first we find out where the dead tissue is, and we need to remove that dead tissue for us to finally get rid of the accumulation of those microbes that shouldn't be at those numbers. If we don't get rid of the dead tissue and we just make the intent to get rid of the infections, it may give you benefit for a little while, but then they'll just replicate again because they have a food source. Okay, now this is another benefit of getting people to start eating living foods more than dead foods, and more whole foods than processed foods. Because when we think about it, if we're eating processed foods, the more processed the food, the more that food is in a structure that is not compatible to the body, right? So when you eat that food, your body's thinking, what the hell do I do with this? And quite often it gets put aside and put somewhere in the body, which then putrefies. And again, more food source, okay, for these microbes to grow. The ones that are going to create an environment that's more acidic, put your body more in an inflammatory state, which is a perfect environment for cancer to grow. Okay, this is cancer, folks. So it's a microbe issue. So what we want to do is we want to be eating living foods that have enzymes in it, right? And the body can see it for what it is. Hey, I know what this food is. I know what we can use it for, and we will. Okay. Obviously, these exceptions are depending on how aerobic or how anaerobic your body is. Okay, how much exercise you do as well. You know, in particular sugars. Okay, from fruit. Okay, very careful if you're a pretty sedentary type of person and don't do a lot of exercise. You have to be very careful even with fruit. Okay, natural fruits. Okay, with the sugars. Okay, because quite often the body doesn't have a need to burn off that energy of the sugars, and then the sugars will sit in the body and perhaps create an adverse fermentation as well that will increase these pathogenic bacteria, mold, and yeast, and so on. So you need to take that into account. Vegetables are a lot safer bet because the vegetables quite often have fibers than the friendly bacteria really like to eat, and they'll increase their numbers. They'll keep everything in check, and then you'll go on with the body being in a clean environment, and that's the way we've got to look at it. The beneficial bacteria keep the body clean. The pathogenic bacteria, the yeast, the mold, the fungus, create a dirty environment in the body. Then that is not at the highest good for you, and therefore you feel that in regards to your energy levels, pain, inflammation, and so on. So anyway, I thought I'd do this video in regards to the relevance and analogy of a root canal. And I guess you can probably guess from my point of view of this, a root canal is a big no-no, because even though from a cosmic viewpoint, hey, it looks good because, hey, I can see my tooth there, there's not a big hole there, but I think our health means more than how we look. And I think, you know, our culture has kind of created this whole thing about way we should look, okay, and that, you know, how the importance of the way we look. Well, I think if we go internal and realize that we want to do the best for our health and the best for ourselves, then that will just then come from the in, glowing to the outside of you. And I think that's the best way to do it than just look at it from a cosmetic point of view. But anyway, post your comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about this topic. And if you have any issues in regards to bloating, or you feel like you've got systemic inflammation, you've got chronic autoimmune conditions as well, could mean that you've got I would say 99% you would have a fermentation problem. And we can address that here at Truly Holistic and get your health back in the right direction. See you later.